essentially what we do is negotiate merger transactions only for MedTech companies. So we're one of the very few specialists in the world that has that focus. I've been involved in it for about 20 years. I was trained at some of the bigger firms and then went into private equity as an investor in MedTech companies. And after doing that for, I don't know, 15 years or so, basically decided that what we wanted to do was create a company that has specialized knowledge to represent medical technologies. It requires an in-depth knowledge of regulatory process, reimbursement, clinical process, data, international markets, and so the baseline for doing this well is far, far above just understanding what makes a good merger transaction, and we wanted to bring that to our clients. Musculoskeletal Transplant Foundation, MTF, which is the largest tissue bank in the world that specializes in allograft tissues and allograft tissue transplant, bone, soft tissue. They asked us a strategic question. Should they be in the business of distributing the tissues themselves in the field of sports medicine? Because they distribute all of their bone tissues and spine tissues through big partners like Synthes and Johnson & Johnson, Orthofix, and others. And the answer we came back with is that it would be consistent with their mission statement for them not to distribute the tissues and invest money in creating a distribution channel, but rather invested in research, which is the core of what MTF does, and consistent with their mission. So we helped them form an alliance, which we sold the sales force off for $147 million. We created a permanent partnership with CONMED Linvatec that's to run 25 years or more, in which there's a revenue split of 50-50 between the company. We secured them $30 million of financing for their cartilage regeneration program, and we helped them acquire a company called Cascade Medical, all in one transaction. So as you can see, it was a complicated transaction, and we won the Association for Corporate Growth, Healthcare and Life Sciences Transaction of the Year because essentially this was a very, very meaningful transaction to MTF. And by the way, they're a nonprofit organization, so it had a very good, beneficial kind of good feel deal to it. I think we as American entrepreneurs need to begin to get out of denial of the changes that are going on in the marketplace. There are some very significant things that are changing that put value at risk. The first is, for a lot of cutting-edge technologies, the regulatory process in the U.S. is very, very much up in the air. And understanding what your regulatory process is and your time to market is critically important to getting funded and critically important to developing your exit value. And if you're in the area of cellular technology, nanotechnology, certain biotechnologies, the fact is the FDA is dealing with your regulatory process on a one-off basis, and entering those markets, it's very unclear what you need to do. The CE mark is currently much clearer. That window will close, and the CE mark and the regulatory approval will become much closer to the same thing. But while that window is open, I think it's important to drive value by getting approval in Europe and using that CE mark to go to European marketing, drive sales in Europe and the BRIC countries around the world, because entry in the US market is much, much more difficult than it used to be. Understanding your reimbursement is also very, very critical. Frequently, innovative technologies change the standard of care in such a way that it's not covered under the current codes. And knowing when and how you're going to get those codes is really very, very important. The way in which you gather your clinical data is now important. Excessive expense on gathering clinical data is a huge problem. In 2012, there were changes in the FDA mandates that allowed them to accept data that's gathered outside of the U.S. So understanding how to effectively collect data outside of the U.S. and present it to the FDA is a very important step in driving value and in merger negotiations with acquirers.